Okay, so it's dry now, and we can resume the painting, right? So I'm getting gradually see darker and darker here, in this area here. But I noticed that because that is in the shadow, in the shade, in shadow, sorry, the the orange is not super chromatic. So what I did, I mixed that with a tiny, tiny little bit of green, and that took off the super bright chromatic edge out of that orange in the area where it is in the shadow mass, right? So as I move down in here, that orange is much more chromatic. But now I see all that speckling, all that little, those little reflections, no, from the inside of the texture surface of the pepper. So I'm trying to replicate that with tiny little brushstroke like this. And I try to be irregular, meaning I don't want to have a sponge painting effect, right? So try to break it down by moving the brush in every direction, and also go into a chaotic pattern as much as possible, because otherwise it will create a pattern that is repetitive and not natural, tend not to be natural. So the orange down here instead is a little bit more chromatic, right? So I paint this area here with a darker orange, but no green, almost no green, right? So we keep doing this, right? Breaking it down. See how all this area here now start creating the sense of depth, right? On the outside of the pepper, the section is, I want to dull the orange a little bit more so that it will result like it's moving away from me. So I'm going to put a little bit of green in it, right? I could also put violet, but the violet would be the complement of orange, but this is kind of a red orange, dark red, so I think either way it's going to be fine. The important thing is that you reduce the chroma of your color, right? Control the chroma of your color. So darker and darker as we go down here, right? So now eventually I'm going to let that dry because I need to start scraping it, right? And you see how this margin in here is also a little bit irregular, so I try to make this margin somehow a little bit sharper, but also irregular, like that, right? And then darken this portion here, darken this portion in here, as I see, you know, I just do what the pepper tells me to do, right? So you proceed like this, right? And then, so in a work like this, you want to be careful let's say this would be an illustration for a botanical text. You got to be careful in interpreting the color that would be acceptable for a still life, but it's not necessarily acceptable. For example, push the chroma or alterate the colors in a scientific work, because that would maybe make the difference between a species and another species, or create confusion, right? So in this case in here, you want to try to replicate the color as close as possible. Just to give you an example, years ago I was doing an illustration for a Scientific American, and I decided to just go crazy, right? And I made the shadows, the color in the shadow of I cannot even remember what it was, but some organism, violet, and the scientists were like, what is that? No, I don't like that. I don't like the violet. You shouldn't. So he went crazy. Actually, she went crazy, and you know, me and the art director looked at each other and said, fine. So I changed I changed the color of the shadow, but it was inconceivable for the scientists that color was violet when shadows should be gray or something like that. So in that moment, you say, all right, this is not the venue to be too creative when I had to describe something according to certain parameters. So I just redid the shadows. But of course, you know, if you do a still life, a painting, and a work that is not for scientific purposes, of course you can do whatever you want. You can push the chroma, you can you know, exaggerate the chroma a little bit more, and so on. So it really depends what it is that you have to do with your painting. So now I want to see if I can lift a little bit of this color here, right? So I'm using a artificial synthetic brush, nice synthetic brush, because it tend to have synthetic brush tend to have the sables a little bit stiffer and lift up a little bit more of work. Oh, yes, just a second. I'll be back in a second. Okay, so I dropped the pencil and I need to get it up. I forget it. There we go. So, so we see gradually our pepper becomes more and more realistic, right? And you see how if you layer the colors with a specific method, you will be able to achieve a certain a very detailed effect, right? So let's look at the skin out here is a little bit darker, right? So I'm going to go over here, get the skin a little bit darker around the pepper. See that? Even darker than that, right? Now I brought out the small guns, right? This is a number 2. Sometimes I use also number 1, number 0, 000, depends really what to do. But number 2 is sufficient. If it's new, it has a very sharp point. And this is Kolinsky Saville. Right? So now I can, so I look at the sea, they have a kind of a yellowish, pale yellow color overall. There's no highlight that I can see, so I'm going to put a kind of a pale yellow color here, right, all over them without leaving any highlight. Then when this is dry, I'm going to go in between, carving out the single seed. So let's see if I can lift a little bit of these highlights with this, right? So we're seeing we can how to achieve the highlights, right? So I can leave the white here, right? Or leave the white and then intervene on it and kind of soften up the edges, or lift it, paint the area and then lift the highlight later on. All methods that are valid, right? And then it depends what kind of highlights you need to achieve. in this case in here, instead I put some resist, I put some wax that prevented the paint from reaching the paper. In other cases, I could use a frisket, like a liquid frisket that you can paint over the area that you need to leave white. But I'm gonna show you that at another moment. I don't have the frisket now, I had to buy it. So now here, hopefully it's dry, let me see. Yeah. See, I can go in between the seeds with a darker color, similar to the color of the background there, right? And carve them out individually, right? Normally I would paint a little bit bigger, right? But then it would take me longer. I wanted to kind of finish this a little bit more. And so if it's smaller, it takes me less time to work on it. But you see what I'm doing now. So now I go with a color that is pretty much the same color as the background in here, right? And now I can afford to kind of have sharp outlines here and there, right? Gradually defining more and more the pepper, right? The seeds, right? Watercolor is a happy paint. I don't know. It has a joy, has a bright color, exuberance. It is almost the exuberance of a young person, right? Discovering things for the first time. The whole world is new. So watercolor is that freshness that is just beautiful. So anyway, so you see what I'm doing, no? So gradually, I'm going to kind of carve out the form. What I don't want to do, I don't want to have a clear, sharp outline around things like that, too thick, because that will flatten the form. I want that background, I mean, this outline be part of the background. I don't want it to stick out as a line, right? Because it would really flatten the form terribly, right? Okay, so and so on, right? So I could paint all the detail that I want to paint in here. Eventually, in some areas there it's really dark, so in some areas there I'm going to get a violet color without telling the scientist, right? And carve out even more those little details. See that? Right. So I was saying about this. This is a really neat cutter that I bought in Italy years ago, a Japanese, and has a very sharp little blade. Now it's a little bit dull because I'm using it a lot, but it should be able to scrape out, see that, some of the highlights with this, right? Scrape out the highlight and kind of recreate a little bit more of that texture that I see in my pepper, right? Here. Here I see a nice highlight here, right? A nice highlight, and then scrape it out. I don't want to do, in this case, kind of lines of color that are, a line of white that are too regular, because it wouldn't work, and it would be too mechanical, too unnatural. So I want to have a little bit of, maybe in this case, yes, see that, but in that case, I see the line is a little bit ragged and jagged, but I don't have it because I added some seed in there, right? So that gives you that sense of moisture, wetness, right? So you could go on like that, until, you know what I'm saying, I don't need to finish it, but I can now go back, for example, and finish this outline of the pepper, right, with the darker side in here, right? A little bit of a funky little thing on top there, right? When it broke. And so on, right? So same thing for this pepper here. Now I keep layering. I want to keep layering the color until I achieve the same intensity, right? Or I'm satisfied with it, right? And at this point, I can start even working with dry brush. So the dry brush will, as I mentioned earlier on, you want to put the paint in that without too much water, and then take off most of it. Take off most of the paint. You end up with just a mixture of paint that is very, I would say, dry. I mean, there's really very little water there, right? And then you can control now how much paint you put in a really precise way, right? So I don't know if you see it, right? Let me see if I can enlarge this so you can see what happened with the when I apply a layer, right, of a dry brush, right? So here, so look at this area here, right? So see how, see, I'm gonna skip this because it's kind of a highlight here, and then I go back here, right? See, compared also this and this, see that how it's lighter? So the layer of dry paint that you apply like this will dry up very quickly, because it's really, there is not much. The water absorbed, the paper absorbed the water, and the paint is dry very quickly. So in a question of a minute, you can go back to the previous layer and add another layer. So gradually I'm going to add, for example, this area here needs to be much darker, right? All that area needs to be much darker, so I'm going to make a violet, darker violet red with quite some pigment. I'll try to get some more pigment in there, right? Because I see it, I moved, right? Well, I see it a little bit darker here, right? Let me try this first, right? You can go with a layer like that, right? And then soften it up. And then soften it up. And then I see also now a reflection here on the side here, because the pepper moved in a way that I did not have it before. And here I could also lift a little bit of paint gradually to get some sort of highlight, right? That's my shadow, right? And then I want to now create a little bit of a better transition between this color here. And at this point, I'm going to go back to dry brush, right? Create a glowing area of highly higher chroma paint. Sorry guys, the long day and I'm really tired. Long few months here. So see that? So that you create this glowing area here with the higher chromatic color, darker, and so on. Then I can keep painting, layering, gradually. Painstakingly, eternally, foreverly. I mean, it can take some time, but not that much, you know. I mean, it really depends, again, what you want to do, right? And maybe I let that dry a little bit. And then I go back to the stem here. And this area here is a little bit dark, right? Here. So I think you have an idea, right? I mean, I don't need to go any further. I think this is pretty much, you know, it is clear what you have to do here, right? So let's so work on this. You can do the pepper if you want. You can do other vegetable cut in half like that, but peppers are fun. Pepper are easier. You see how this color here needs still quite a lot of work, but I just wanted you to show the method and not necessarily finish the work. Okay, I'm looking forward to see your paintings.